The first light on Cathar's display came without a sound, then another, then 10 more, spreading across the black like something spilling that nobody could stop. Cathar had one eye left. He'd lost the other 33 years ago, in a border skirmish nobody bothered naming anymore. He leaned toward the screen the way a man leans toward a wound, just to see how bad it was. 47 ships were all he had. He counted them again in his head, just to hear the number. 47 out of the 90 that had crossed into the Grey Reach with him 3 days before. The Grey Reach was supposed to be empty. It had been empty for 97 years. That was the whole point of the place. Nobody flew here. Nobody claimed it. Nobody had needed to, not since the vote that cleared it out. Then the lights kept coming. A voice cut through the comm before Cathar's crew could raise a channel of their own. It was flat, human. Steadier than anything had a right to be out here. In a graveyard everyone had agreed to stop visiting. Identify yourself. Cathar's mandibles clicked once, an old habit he'd never managed to break. We have 47 ships, we have nowhere else to go. Silence answered him. Not empty silence, the kind with weight in it, like a held breath on the other end. Then how many behind you? 1,200 their main fleet. Another silence longer than the first. Whatever was listening on the other end wasn't angry. Cathar could tell that much already, and it scared him more than anger would have. Hold position, the voice said. Do not fire on anything, you are in our space now. Cathar's display kept updating. The lights weren't finished. I wish I could tell you it stopped at 47 ships. It didn't. Stay with me. The conclave spire had stood for 8,000 years. It had never once been wrong about a species. 97 years before Cathar counted those lights it was. The chamber was carved from stone so old it had gone translucent. Its walls holding every vote the spire had ever taken, burned into the rock like a ledger nobody could erase. Ambassador Vixara stood at the podium, 4 fingers spread against the lectern's edge. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. The human species is a death world product, she said. They are a knife waiting for a hand to hold. I propose we remove the hand. Scout leader Cathar sat in the Vethrani section, one eye fixed on her, and said nothing. He would vote no. He already knew it wouldn't matter. Around him, delegates from 40 other systems shifted in their seats, not from doubt, but from the particular restlessness of people who'd already made up their minds and just wanted the ceremony over with. A Pelari archivist near the back, old even by Pelari standards, silver-scaled, 400 years behind those tired eyes, pressed a stylus against a data slate and didn't write anything down. The vote came back 392 to 44. The 44 were Vethrani. They would be the first ones sanctioned for it, though Cathar didn't know that yet. Some part of him already did. Council law gave the humans 72 hours to withdraw from Spire-administered space. Everyone in that chamber called it mercy. The humans used 47 of those hours to build something else entirely. On a rim colony called New Carthage, Commander Marcus Webb touched the dog tag at his chest, the one from the first colony his unit had lost, and said, "Ma'am, that protocol was written for extinction-level events." Admiral Isara Chen didn't look up from her console. She was 47 years old, gray already climbing into her temples, 29 years in the fleet behind her. A cup of coffee sat at her elbow, gone cold an hour ago. A photograph of Earth sat beside it, its edges already softening from how often she touched it. "I know," she said. "That's what this is." She set down the coffee. "Activate Shepard." Dr. Yuki Tanaka looked up from full drive schematics she'd spent 19 years perfecting, a chipped ceramic cup halfway to her mouth. "Now?" "We haven't even left the system now," Chen said. "We won't get another window." Tanaka set the cup down without drinking from it. That was the tell. If anyone had been watching for it, she never left a cup untouched. She drained the rest in one go, then didn't reach for it again, and moved to her station instead. 3 colonies went dark before the withdrawal deadline hit. New Arcadia, Cerise Station, the Garden Colony. The interdiction fleet arrived to enforce the boundary and found nothing but empty orbit and cold reactors. The council listed all 3 as presumed dead. No survivors. The record said they weren't dead. They were shipyards. And they had been shipyards since the vote was still being counted. Chen touched the photograph on her console once more before she stood. "Get everyone aboard," she said. "We're not coming back the way they think we are." Webb frowned. "How's that, ma'am?" She didn't answer right away. Behind her, on the display, the last transport ships lifted off New Carthage's cracked landing pads in a line that didn't seem to end. They think silence means we gave up, she said finally. Let them think that for a while. The withdrawal fleet swept the border a week later. Weapons hot, ready for a fight nobody gave them. 87 council ships. 4 dreadnoughts among them. Hulls scarred from older wars nobody remembered the names of anymore. They found the Grey Reach exactly as empty as the reports promised. Not a single human vessel. Not a single signal. The fleet's commander wrote in his log that humanity had gone quietly, almost gratefully, into extinction. He filed it. No one questioned it. Records that are never questioned have a way of becoming exactly what they claim to be, until they don't. Back on New Carthage, in the last hour before the final transport lifted, Webb found Chen standing alone at the edge of the launch pad, looking at a horizon that would, within a decade, belong to someone else's colony. You could have told them the truth, he said. The council bought us goodwill. Goodwill doesn't build ships, Chen said. Time does. 987 years is a long time to wait on a maybe. It's not a maybe. She finally looked at him. It's the only thing we've got left that they can't take from us. They can vote us out of a chamber. They can't vote away what we do with the years after. Webb didn't have an answer for that. He touched the dog tag again, the metal worn smooth at its edges from the same habit that had softened Chen's photograph. What do we tell the ones who ask why we're running instead of fighting? We tell them we're not running. Chen turned back toward the ships. We're loading the rifle. 3 days into the exodus, Tanaka found a problem with the full drive math that nobody else had caught. She brought it to Chen at 0300, still in yesterday's uniform, eyes red from a screen she hadn't left in 11 hours. The margin's too tight, Tanaka said. If we're wrong about the deceleration curve by even 0.5%, we lose ships translating out of fold. How many ships? Depends how wrong we are. Could be none, could be a lot. Chen looked at the numbers for a long moment. Somewhere down the corridor a child was crying, the sound thin and far away, the way sounds get on a ship built for people who don't want to be found. Recalculate, Chen said. Take the time you need. We have 97 years. We don't have 97 years of dead children. Tanaka nodded, and for the first time since the vote, something in her shoulders came down 1/2 inch. It would take her 6 more years to trust the math completely. She never told anyone that either. On the transport Meridian, a man named Elias Voss, 31 then, a torn sleeve on his jacket that he refused to have mended. Some corrections don't announce themselves. They just quietly stop something from breaking. Not every ship that scattered from New Carthage's orbit went the same direction, and not every soul aboard them agreed on why they were leaving. A habit he'd picked up from a father who never explained why either, argued with a woman half his age about whether they should have stayed and fought instead. They outnumber us 80-1, Voss said. Fighting isn't bravery. It's just a faster way to lose, and this isn't losing, she shot back. Running for 97 years into a hole in space no one will ever find us in. They already stopped looking, Voss said. That's the whole plan. Nobody hunts something they've already buried. She didn't have an answer for that either. Most people didn't. In those first months, it took years before anyone understood that the plan wasn't hiding. It was patience with teeth. Cather didn't know any of that back in the Spire, watching Vixara collect her votes like a woman gathering coins off a table. All he knew was that his people had voted no, and that no one else in the chamber seemed to think that mattered. After the session, the old Pelari archivist, the one who hadn't written anything down, caught him in the corridor outside the chamber doors. You voted against the motion, the archivist said. It wasn't a question. So did 43 others. 43 others who will be easier to sanction than admit we're right. The archivist's eyes, 400 years tired, held on Kethar's for a moment. I keep records nobody reads, Scout Leader. I noticed the 3 colonies before the vote finished counting. I filed a report. And no one read that either. He turned to go, then paused. Watch the human silence, Cathar. In my 400 years, the loudest species I ever recorded were always the ones about to lose. The quiet ones were building something. Cathar didn't understand him. Not then. It would take 97 years, a burning homeworld, and 47 ships running for their lives before he understood anything the old archivist had meant. The Vithrani homeworld fell on the 612th day of the Draken War, though nobody counted days that precisely until much later, when counting was all that was left to do. Cathar wasn't there when it happened. He was 3 systems away, running escort for a convoy of Vithrani elders too old to fight and too proud to hide. He got the transmission mid-jump, half garbled, his own homeworld's emergency channel screaming into static before it cut out entirely. He didn't sleep for 2 days after that. He didn't need his crew to tell him the numbers, because he already knew them the way you know your own hands. 47 ships were what the Vithrani fleet had left, out of a force that had once numbered in the low thousands. The Draken didn't stop at the Vithrani. They never stopped at anything. Overlord Kael'thor's Warspire broadcast the conquest across a dozen systems, a voice that had been right for 1,200 years, telling everyone still listening that resistance only prolonged what was already decided. Cathar had heard that voice before. Once, in a diplomatic session he'd sat through as a much younger scout. He remembered a locket at Kael'thor's throat, small and unremarkable against all that blackened bronze armor, and he remembered being told it held soil. A pinch from every world the Overlord had ever taken. 43 worlds that locket held. Cathar wondered, running for his life through the last quiet stretch of the war, how much heavier it had gotten since. The council chamber, by then, had fallen quiet in a different way than the humans ever had. Half the delegate seats sat empty, their occupants dead or fled or converted to whatever the Draken called cooperation. Vixara herself had stopped attending sessions months earlier. Some said she was overseeing the front lines personally, others said she simply couldn't stand to watch the council she'd once commanded reduced to rubber-stamping Draken demands. The Pelari archivist remained. He always remained. He sat in the same seat, 412 years old now, watching the empty places around him fill in with silence instead of delegates, and he kept filing reports nobody read. He filed one the week the Vithrani homeworld fell. It said simply, "We were warned. We did not listen. The pattern has a name, and the name is patience." No one read that one either. Not yet. Cathar ran for 11 weeks after the homeworld fell, losing ships in ones and twos to Draken patrols that seemed to appear faster than any intelligence network should have allowed. He didn't understand that either, not until much later. Didn't understand that the tactics hunting him down had been built, patiently, over 97 years, out of recordings the Draken had pulled from the very archives that recorded humanity's expulsion. The Draken had studied how the humans fought once. They'd built a war machine on those bones. They had no idea the humans had been recording them back the entire time. By the time Cathar's 47 ships crossed into the Grey Reach, he wasn't running toward anything. He was simply running out of anywhere else to go. The exclusion zone was the one piece of space in the galaxy nobody bothered to patrol, because nobody believed there was anything left in it worth finding. He expected empty stars. He expected, if he was honest with himself, to die out there quietly, 47 ships and a few thousand refugees, drifting, until the fuel or the food or the will ran out first. Instead, at 0300 ship time on the third day, his sensors picked up a signal. A single voice, human and steadier than anything, had a right to be. Identify yourself. If someone had told Cathar, back in that chamber 8,000 years old, that the quiet species everyone voted to erase would be the one holding a door open for him 97 years later, he would not have believed them. Not even the archivist would have guessed it would look exactly like this. A scout with one eye and 47 ships, staring at a screen that kept lighting up, and a voice on the other end that had waited its entire existence to say 4 words. "You are in our space now." Cathar's display kept updating. 800 ships lit the screen, then 1,200, then 2,000, then 3,400. And in the center of all that light, a ship so large it blotted out the star behind it. His crew had gone silent around him. Not the fearful kind of quiet. The kind that comes when a person realizes the story they'd been told their whole life was wrong, and there isn't a polite way to say so out loud. "Confirm that count," Cathar said, though he already knew the numbers weren't going to change. "Confirmed, sir." 3,400 vessels, reading the flagship now. The voice came back over the open channel, calm as it had been from the first word. "This is Fleet Command. State your intentions." Cathar found he didn't have an easy answer for that. "We're running. The Draken main force is a day behind us. Maybe less." "We know," the voice said. "We've known for 6 hours. That stopped him harder than the ship count had." "Known how?" "You crossed into monitored space 11 hours ago, Scout Leader. You were never hiding. You were just the first one we let see us." Cathar's one eye moved across the display, across all that light he hadn't believed could exist anymore. 97 years, he said mostly to himself. "You built all of this in 97 years. We had warning," the voice said. "We used it. Admiral Isara Chen received the scout's transmission on the bridge of a ship named for a city that no longer existed anywhere but in memory. She was 144 years old now, the extended years bought by tech. Her people had traded quietly with a species that owed the Vithrani a debt nobody in the council chamber ever knew about. Her hair had gone from gray to white sometime in the last 4 decades. She hadn't noticed exactly when. The photograph was still on her console. The edges had gone soft as cloth. Confirmed contact with a Vithrani scout element, Webb said. He was older now too. The dog tag long since replaced by 3 others, one for each war they'd fought quietly out here where no one was counting. 47 ships. He says the Draken main force is close behind. Bring him in, Chen said. All of them. Feed the refugees first. Tanaka, seated at her station with the same chipped ceramic cup she'd somehow kept intact for 97 years, didn't look up from her raidouts. The fold drive math held, she said quietly. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't really meant for anyone. 6 years of double-checking, 91 more of watching it hold, and she still said it like she needed to hear it out loud sometimes. It held, Chen agreed. Get me a channel to the Draken Fleet Commander. Ma'am. Webb hesitated. That's Kael'thor's flagship leading them. 1,200 ships. Overlord himself. If the scouts' numbers are right, I know who's leading them. Chen's voice didn't rise. It never did. That's why I want the channel. Elias Voss found her 20 minutes later, still wearing a jacket with a tear in the sleeve he'd refused to mend for 97 years, though the man underneath it had gone gray and then white right alongside her. He'd argued with her once decades ago about running instead of fighting. He didn't argue anymore. He'd learned the slow way, what the running had actually been. They're bombing the memorial colony, he said. New Arcadia. What's left of it? Chen's jaw tightened, the only sign she gave. On the tactical display, the old shipyard world, empty for 97 years, kept standing only as a marker, a place where the names of the first 3 colonies were carved into stone nobody visited, burned under Draken fire. A symbolic strike. They thought there was no one left to grieve it. Chen touched the photograph on her console. The same photograph. 97 years of the same soft edges under her thumb. Set course, she said. All ships, Voss nodded once. Target, the Draken fleet first. She looked at the flames a moment longer, and after that every council world that voted yes. Tanaka frowned without looking up. We came all this way, for the council. No. Chen didn't look away from the burning colony. We came back because they need to know what they built when they voted us out. She opened a channel, one signal broadcast wide across the gray reach and beyond it, into whatever was left of council space still listening. We were never gone, she said. We were just waiting for you to notice. 3,400 ships moved as one. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. It didn't feel like 11 minutes to Overlord Kael'thor, watching his forward lines collapse in a pattern he didn't recognize and couldn't counter, because it wasn't a Draken pattern at all. They knew where the second wave would be before we committed it. Kael'thor's 4-fingered hands gripped the arms of his command chair the way they'd gripped 43 podiums after 43 conquests, and for the first time in 1,200 years. It was 97 years of patience arranged into a shape built to look, for exactly as long as it needed to, like weakness. They're not retreating, his tactical officer said, disbelief cutting through the report. They're flanking the second wave. The locket at his throat, heavy with soil from every world he'd ever taken, felt lighter than it ever had. That grip found nothing solid to hold on to. Pull back the flagship, he said, his voice certain for 12 centuries, cracked once around the words. Pull back all of it. It was already too late to matter. And he didn't understand why until much later, until he understood that soil from 43 worlds meant nothing next to a species that had simply waited long enough to need none of his conquests at all. The Draken fleet lost 847 ships. The humans lost 12. Cathar sat in his scout vessel afterward, one eye fixed on a display gone quiet in a different way than it had been an hour ago. He didn't speak for 3 minutes. When he finally did, it was barely above a whisper. They never needed help, he said. They were just waiting for us to ask. In the council chamber, half its seats still empty from the war, the Pelari archivist sat alone, watching the scout feed loop on a small projection above his desk. He was 412 years old now, and he had filed a report 97 years ago that no one had read. He read it again himself now. The words he'd written the week 3 colonies went silent. We were warned. We did not listen. The pattern has a name, and the name is patience. They built something, he said to the empty room. While we were voting, he paused and added the part he hadn't written down back then because he hadn't understood it yet either. We classified them as dead. We never asked how they died. We never asked why they went silent. The council would hold a special session in 4 days. The agenda reads simply, reconsideration of human status. Somewhere in the record, a clerk had already gone through and struck the word extinct wherever it appeared. Aboard her ship, Chen sat alone for the first time in longer than she could remember. The photograph was still on her console, the same creased square of paper it had always been, the same soft edges, the same blue-green world in the corner of the frame. It wasn't a memory anymore. She'd stopped needing it to be one somewhere in the last 97 years without ever noticing the exact day it happened. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The loudest thing in the universe is silence. Humanity had been quiet for 97 years. Now it wasn't. Continuing as a genuine epilogue. No manufactured crisis, just the aftermath, the story earned. The council chamber had not held a full session in 11 weeks. On the day of the special session, every seat that could be filled was filled, and the ones that couldn't stayed empty on purpose, left that way as a kind of silence the delegates had finally learned to read correctly. The Polari archivist arrived first, as he always did. 412 years old, silver scales dulled with age. He took the same seat he'd taken for longer than most of the species in that chamber, had existed as anything more than a rumor on a star chart. He set his data slate on the podium rail and did not write anything down. He didn't need to, this time. He already had 97 years of notes nobody had read, and he intended to read every page of them into the record himself. The agenda item appeared on the display above the chamber floor, reconsideration of human status. Someone, a clerk whose name nobody would remember, had already gone through the archive and struck the word extinct everywhere it appeared next to the word human. It left strange gaps in the old reports, sentences that trailed off where a word used to sit, and no one had decided yet what to put there instead. Admiral Chen did not attend in person. She sent Voss the tear in his jacket sleeve finally mended sometime in the last year. Though he still touched the spot out of habit, the way a man checks a scar that's stopped hurting but hasn't stopped being there. "They want an apology," Voss said, standing where Vixara had once stood in a chamber that had voted his species dead 98 years earlier. "I don't think that's what we're here for." "Then what are you here for?" asked a delegate from a system Cathar didn't recognize, one of the newer voices filling the empty seats left by species the Draken had swallowed and spat back out changed. "We're here to tell you what patience costs," Voss said. "It costs you every year you don't get to spend being angry. It costs you a photograph you touch so many times the edges stop being paper and start being something else. It costs generations who were born already knowing they might die for a decision made before they existed." He paused. "We paid that. We're not interested in collecting it back from you in an apology. We'd rather you just remembered how you got here." The chamber was quiet the way it had been quiet 97 years before, in the moment right after Vexara's proposal passed. Except this time, the archivist thought, watching from his seat, the quiet meant something different. This time it wasn't agreement, it was people finally hearing something they should have heard the first time. Overlord Kelthor was not present at the session. He would never be present at another council session again. He sat instead in a detention hold 3 systems away, in a cell built for a species considerably smaller than his knees drawn up in a way that made the 1,200-year-old conqueror look, for the first time in anyone's memory, like something that could be contained. The locket was gone. It had been taken from him during processing, catalogued as evidence, 43 pinches of soil from 43 worlds, reduced to an item number on a manifest. He'd asked for it back twice. Both times, the answer had been the same patient no. A young Draken officer, one of the few who'd survived the 11-minute collapse of the fleet, was permitted to visit him once. She didn't ask him what had gone wrong. She already knew. She'd watched the tactical feed from a support ship, watched the human fleet fold around the second wave in a shape that made sense only if you assumed they'd known exactly where that wave would be before the Draken had chosen to send it. "You always said strength was what you could bring to bear today," she said instead. "Not what you might build for tomorrow." Kael'thor didn't answer for a long moment. When he did, his voice had none of the certainty that had carried it through 1,200 years and 43 conquests. "I conquered by making people afraid faster than they could plan," he said. "I never accounted for a species that had already finished planning before I arrived." He looked at his empty hands. the ones that used to grip podiums and throats with the same casual pressure. I mistook their patience for surrender. That was my first error. It was almost word for word the line the humans had used against him during the brief negotiation before the surrender terms were finalized. He didn't know that. He'd simply arrived on his own at the same conclusion. Cathar testified before the council on the third day of the session, standing where his 43 fellow Vethrani delegates had once sat and voted no to a motion that cost them everything. Most of those seats were empty now. Not all of the 44 had lived to see this. I was in the Grey Reach with 47 ships, he said. I expected to die there. Instead, I found 3,400 human ships and a voice that told me to hold position. He paused, his one eye moving across the chamber, across delegates who had voted his people's extinction into the record a lifetime ago and never revisited it since. I have thought about that voice every day since. It never asked me what I'd done to deserve rescue. It simply said I was in their space, and that meant I was safe. He let that sit a moment. 97 years ago, this chamber decided a species was a knife with no hand to hold it. You were wrong about the knife. You were also wrong about needing a hand. Patience held it instead the whole time, and none of you noticed because you were only ever measuring the kind of strength you already understood. The archivist, listening from his seat, finally allowed himself something close to satisfaction, not triumph. Just the quiet, worn-down feeling of a man who had filed the same warning for 97 years and lived long enough to watch someone else finally read it. The vote on human status came back unanimous. Humanity had not asked for readmission to a council that had voted them dead, and the council, chastened, did not offer full membership so much as something closer to a wary truce, drafted by delegates who understood. Finally, unanimous votes were rare enough in that chamber that the record clerk had to check the tally twice before certifying it. It changed little, in practical terms, that the species they were negotiating with had spent a century proving it did not need their permission for anything. The Vethrani were granted what the archivist's reports had asked for 97 years too late: full recognition, reparations that could never actually replace a homeworld, and a permanent seat reserved for whatever remained of their people, however few that turned out to be. Overlord Kael'thor's trial would take 3 more years. Vixara's would take longer, delayed by a Draken civil upheaval that followed the fleet's collapse, a reckoning inside the Dominion itself over who had led them into a war they were never equipped to win. Neither trial mattered much to the people who'd survived what came before them. Reconings rarely do once the surviving is over. Admiral Chen retired 8 months after the special session, at 145 years old, in a ceremony she asked to keep small. Tanaka gave a short speech about full drive margins that made almost no sense to anyone who hadn't spent 19 years perfecting the math, and cried through most of it anyway. Webb? 3 sets of dog tags heavier than the young commander who'd once questioned an extinction-level protocol, said nothing at all, just stood near the back with his hand resting where the metal sat against his chest. What the photograph actually was to you, all those years. They didn't need to know that part. Chen touched her coat pocket, where the photograph still lived, folded now inside a case. Tanaka had built for it out of the same alloy as the full drive housings. Voss found Chen afterward, in the quiet after everyone else had gone, standing at the edge of a viewport looking out at stars that no longer belonged to anyone's exclusion zone. You never told them, he said, in there. The one material in the galaxy that would never let it degrade further. That part was never for the council. Who was it for, then? She didn't answer right away. Outside the viewport, New Carthage's old coordinates drifted somewhere in the dark, a colony rebuilt slowly by people who had waited 97 years to be allowed to stop hiding. It was for the 97 years, she finally said. Something had to hold the shape of what we were waiting for. It might as well have been a photograph instead of a speech nobody would have believed anyway. She took it out of the case, one last time, and looked at the soft blue-green world in the corner of the frame. The edges had stopped being paper decades ago. They were something closer to memory now, worn down to the shape of every hand that had ever needed to hold onto something small enough to carry through a century of silence. She didn't put it away right away. She just held it, in the quiet, the way she had the first day, in a small room with a metal table and a cup of coffee gone cold. Then she folded it back into its case, and walked out to see what the next 100 years might ask of her instead. 40 years after Chen walked out of that ceremony, a girl named Aiko Voss Tanaka, 11 years old, found the photograph in a drawer she wasn't supposed to be going through. She wasn't looking for it. She'd been looking for a stylus she'd lost, and instead found a metal case, cool and unmarked, tucked beneath a stack of her great-grandmother's old service logs. She almost didn't open it. Then she did. The photograph inside had gone the color of old tea, its edges soft as cloth, worn down to a texture that didn't feel like paper at all anymore. A blue-green world sat small in one corner of the frame, half lost in a haze that might have been damage or might have been clouds. Nobody living could say for certain which. She brought it to her grandfather, Elias Voss, 91 now, still touching a spot on his sleeve where a tear had been mended so long ago, even he sometimes forgot it used to be there. "What is it?" He looked at it a long moment before he answered. "It's Earth," he said. Before what? Before we learned how to wait for something." He turned the photograph over once, though there had never been anything written on the back, not in 97 years of hands touching it, not once. "Your great-great-grandmother carried this through a war that lasted 100 years and never fired a shot for most of it." Aiko frowned at the little world in the frame, trying to make it match anything she'd been taught. History lessons talked about fleets and votes, and a council session where a word got struck from the record. Nobody had taught her about a photograph. Is it worth anything? Voss almost laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "No," he said. "That's exactly why it mattered." He didn't explain further. Some things he'd learned only meant something if you found them yourself. The way Chen had once said the photograph was never really meant for the council. It hadn't been meant for museums either. He let Aiko keep it. It sat in her own drawer through school, through a first posting on a border relay station, through a decade spent doing the kind of quiet, unglamorous work that never made it into any council record, repairing fold-drive housings. She didn't understand it for years. The same math Tanaka had spent 19 years perfecting long before Aiko was born. She understood it, finally, on the day she stood on New Carthage's rebuilt landing pads, watching a new generation of transport ships lift off toward a colony that no longer had to hide from anyone. She took the photograph out of her coat pocket, where she'd taken to carrying it without deciding to, the way habits arrive before the reasons for them do. The edges had gone soft under her thumb, too. Now, she hadn't noticed exactly when that started either. Somewhere behind her, a child asked a question she couldn't hear over the engines, and an old man's voice answered it, patient, unhurried. The way answers had sounded in that family for longer than anyone alive could remember learning any other way. Aiko didn't look back to see who they were. She didn't need to. She folded the photograph away into a pocket worn soft in exactly the shape of it, and watched the ships climb until they were only light.